name is Alex Carter, and I need to write this down to try and make sense of it all before it fades like a bad dream, or worse, solidifies into a truth I can no longer deny. There were 4 of us when we went into the Willapa Hills of Washington. Liam, his sister Chloe, his girlfriend Sarah, and me. We were seasoned campers, not weekend warriors. We sought the quiet places, the spots on the map where the trails dissolved and the true wilderness began. This trip was meant to be a celebration, a final escape before the autumn rains sealed the backcountry for the winter. Liam Vance was our unofficial leader. He was the kind of man who seemed carved from the very timber of the Pacific Northwest. Tall and steady, with a quiet confidence that put everyone at ease. An engineer by trade, he approached the wild with a mixture of reverence and methodical precision. He believed in preparedness, in knowing your gear, and in the simple, unbreakable rule: the wilderness doesn't forgive foolishness. He was my oldest friend, and I trusted him implicitly. His girlfriend, Dr. Sarah Jenkins, was the group's anchor to the empirical world. A botanist working on her post-doctorate, she saw the forest not as a single entity, but as a complex ecosystem of competing, explainable phenomena. Where we saw shadows, she saw the interplay of light through the canopy. Where we heard strange noises, she heard the calls of birds and the settling of trees. She was brilliant, pragmatic, and a gentle skeptic who could dismantle your deepest anxieties with a calm, rational explanation. Her presence was a comfort, a shield against the primal fears that flicker at the edges of a campfire's light. Then there was Chloe Vance, Liam's younger sister. An artist who worked with charcoal and film photography, Chloe was more attuned to the forest's moods than the rest of us. She was sensitive, intuitive, and saw the world in shades of light and emotion that often escaped me. While Liam mapped our route and Sarah cataloged the flora, Chloe would capture the haunting beauty of a moss-covered log or the skeletal grace of a dead tree. She was the first to feel that something was wrong. We should have listened to her. Our journey began on a crisp Thursday morning, leaving the urban sprawl of Seattle behind and pushing west towards the coast. The farther we drove, the more the world seemed to peel back, layer by layer. 4-lane highways bled into 2-lane roads, which in turn gave way to winding asphalt that hugged the hills. We passed through small, forgotten towns that felt like relics of a bygone era. Places where peeling paint and rusted cars in overgrown yards spoke of economic stagnation. A stray dog watched us pass, its ribs a faint outline beneath its coat, and for a moment, it felt as if we were driving into a story someone else had written, a place where the normal rules were beginning to fray. Liam had chosen a spot deep in the Willapa Hills, a region less frequented than the Grand National Parks. Fewer people, more quiet, he'd said. Navigating the final stretch of a gravel logging road that rattled the truck's frame. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The trees here were ancient titans, Douglas firs and western red cedars that formed a dense canopy, plunging the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. The silence was profound, a heavy, weighted quiet that seemed to absorb sound. It wasn't peaceful, it was expectant. We finally parked where the road became impassable and began our hike. Our destination was a small, secluded river bend Liam had found on a satellite map. The hike took us deeper into the green cathedral. Sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy, dappling the ground in shifting, ethereal patterns. After 2 hours, we arrived. The spot was beautiful, but in a way that was unsettling. The river curved around a wide, marshy flat, and rising from the silt and shallow water were dozens of pale, dead cedar snags. They stood like bone, white skeletons, their bark long since stripped away, their branches reaching for a sky they could no longer feel. It was a ghost forest, a place where a past cataclysm, a flood, a sudden shift in the land, had killed the trees but left them, standing as monuments to their own demise. The sight was stark and strangely beautiful, a natural graveyard that served as a silent, formidable warning of the landscape's power. "Well, it's private," Liam said, dropping his pack with a heavy thud. Chloe stood at the water's edge, her camera already in her hand, though she hadn't taken a picture. "It feels old," she whispered, and I knew she didn't just mean the trees. We fell into the familiar, comforting rituals of setting up camp. It's a process that grounds you, a series of logical steps that impose order on the wild. Liam and I pitched the tents, staking them securely against the damp ground. Sarah, ever the scientist, immediately began setting up her water filtration system, explaining the importance of purifying even the clearest looking stream water to avoid pathogens. We worked together seamlessly, a small, functioning unit bound by years of friendship and shared experience. This strong sense of belonging, this trust in one another, felt like our greatest strength. In hindsight, it was our greatest vulnerability, the very thing the forest would seek to unravel. As dusk began to bleed through the trees, Liam tasked me with gathering extra firewood. I ventured a little farther from the campsite than usual, following a line of fallen birch. The air was growing cold, and the deep shadows between the trees were merging into a single, impenetrable darkness. I was about 50 yards from camp, my arms full of dry branches, when I heard it. "Alex." It was a whisper, clear and distinct. It was Sarah's voice. I stopped, turning my head back towards the glow of our fire. I could see her silhouette moving near the tents, her back to me, talking to Liam. She couldn't have called for me. "The wind plays tricks," I muttered to myself, echoing a phrase Liam often used. Sound can carry in strange ways out here. I shook it off, attributing it to an auditory illusion, my brain simply trying to find a familiar pattern in the sigh of the wind through the pines. It was a classic case of normalcy bias. My mind, having no frame of reference for a truly supernatural event, defaulted to the most mundane and logical explanation it could find. I hurried back to the relative safety of the firelight, dumping the wood and trying to forget the chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Later, as we sat around the crackling fire, the ghost forest across the river seemed to watch us, its pale snags like silent sentinels in the fading light. We ate our dehydrated meals, the conversation flowing easily, the earlier unease forgotten. We were telling stories, laughing, when suddenly Chloe flinched. She stared out into the pitch, black woods beyond our circle of light. "What is it?" Liam asked, his voice soft. I thought I heard Mom laugh," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her mother had passed away 3 years ago. The sound she described, a short, distinctive chuckle, was something deeply personal, a sound of memory. "It was probably just an owl, Chloe," Liam said reassuringly, putting an arm around her. "They can make some weird sounds. Don't let the woods spook you." Sarah nodded in agreement. "He's right. Your brain is primed to hear familiar things, especially when you're tired. It's a form of pareidolia, but for sound, you're just filling in the blanks." Chloe tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She leaned against her brother, and the moment passed. But the seed of unease had been replanted. We talked for a while longer, but the easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a quiet tension. We retreated to our tents earlier than usual. Liam and Chloe shared one, Sarah and I the other. Lying in my sleeping bag, I listened to the sounds of the forest, but there were none. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of small animals, the hoot of an owl, all of it was gone. The world outside our thin nylon walls was utterly, unnervingly silent. The kind of silence that signals the presence of a predator. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, but my mind kept replaying the whisper. Alex. It hadn't been distorted. It hadn't been vague. It had been Sarah's voice, perfect in its inflection, its tone. It was a sound I knew as well as my own, and it had come from the deep, dark woods where nothing was supposed to be. I lay there for what felt like hours, every nerve ending alight. The feeling was no longer just unease. It was a slow, creeping realization, a cold certainty settling in the pit of my stomach that something was fundamentally and terribly wrong. The stillness outside wasn't empty. It was listening. Sleep didn't come. I lay in the oppressive silence, my senses stretched to their breaking point, listening for a sound that wasn't there. The absolute void of noise was more terrifying than any scream. It was a suffocating blanket, a deliberate absence that felt curated, controlled. Every few minutes, I'd hear Sarah shift in her sleeping bag beside me, her breathing shallow and quick. She wasn't sleeping either. The thin nylon walls of our tent, usually a symbol of shelter and security, now felt like a permeable membrane, barely separating us from the vast, listening dark. Morning arrived not with the gentle chorus of birdsong, but with a cold, gray light that filtered through the canopy, painting our world in monochrome. The silence held. It was the first thing we all noticed. No one had to say it. We emerged from our tents into a world that felt muted, as if we were moving through a photograph of a forest rather than the real thing. The air was still and heavy with moisture, each breath a visible plume of white. Chloe looked pale, her eyes wide and shadowed, with a fear that hadn't subsided with the dawn. She clutched a mug of tea with both hands, as if for warmth, but her gaze was fixed on the skeletal trees across the river. Liam, ever the pragmatist, was trying to force a sense of normalcy onto the morning. He moved with a deliberate, almost aggressive purpose, clanking the metal stove, organizing gear, talking in a voice that was a little too loud for the stillness. "All right, team. Plan for today is a short hike up that ridge," he announced, pointing with a stick of jerky. "Get a lay of the land, maybe find a better view. Sarah can check out the alpine vegetation." "I don't want to go," Chloe said, her voice small. "I want to go home." "Chloe, we just got here." Liam sighed, his patience already wearing thin. "We're not packing it all in because of a weird dream and a hoot owl." "It wasn't a dream, Liam. And that wasn't an owl," she insisted, her voice trembling. "And Alex heard something too, didn't you?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. I saw the appeal in Chloe's, the challenge in Liam's, and the clinical curiosity in Sarah's. I hesitated, caught between validating Chloe's fear and inviting Liam's dismissal. I thought I heard Sarah call my name. I admitted, choosing my words carefully. But the wind does strange things to sound out here. It was probably nothing. Sarah seized on the rational explanation I offered. Exactly. Auditory pareidolia. It's a well-documented phenomenon, especially in environments with low-level, ambiguous noise. Or, in this case, the lack of it. Your brain is trying to find patterns. Her explanation was textbook perfect, yet it felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the memory of that whisper. The trust we had in each other, our greatest asset, was beginning to show hairline fractures. We were no longer a unified group, but individuals trying to reconcile a shared, unsettling experience with our own beliefs. We ate breakfast in a strained silence. Liam's forced cheerfulness had evaporated, replaced by a sullen determination. To his credit, he tried to compromise.
Okay, how about this?
We don't go far. We'll just follow the riverbank for a mile. Stay within sight of camp. We can't just sit here and spook ourselves. It seemed a reasonable enough suggestion, and no one had a better one. Reluctantly, we agreed. We left the main camp set up, taking only small day packs with water and essentials. The rule was to stay together. We walked along the muddy bank, the ghost forest our constant, silent companion across the water. The air remained unnaturally still. About half a mile from camp, the riverbank became a tangle of thick brush and fallen logs, forcing us to spread out to find a path through. Liam was in the lead, about 20 feet ahead, hacking at a branch with his machete. Chloe was a few yards behind him, and I was bringing up the rear with Sarah. We were separated, but still within easy shouting distance. That's when we heard it. "Get back to camp! Now!" The voice was sharp, urgent, and filled with authority. It was Liam's voice, unmistakably. It cut through the silence like a whip crack. Chloe and I froze, our heads snapping towards the direction of camp. Sarah gasped beside me. The command was so clear, so forceful, that our bodies reacted before our minds could process it. We turned, ready to sprint back, our hearts hammering against our ribs. But then I looked at Liam. He was still standing there, 20 feet ahead, his back to us. He slowly lowered his machete and turned around, a look of utter confusion on his face. "What?" he mouthed. "What was that? What's wrong?" I called out, my voice tight with adrenaline. "What are you talking about?" Liam asked, walking back towards us. I didn't say anything. "We'd all heard you," Chloe said, her voice shaking. "You yelled. You told us to go back to camp." Liam stared at us, his brow furrowed. "No, I didn't. I was right here. You were all behind me. I haven't said a word for 5 minutes." We stood in a stunned, silent circle. 4 people who had heard the same thing, clear as day. And the man who had supposedly said it was denying it. The seed of mistrust began to sprout. Was he lying? Was this some kind of bizarre, cruel prank? Or was the alternative that something else had spoken in his voice even possible? "It must have been an echo," Sarah said, but her voice lacked all conviction. She was looking into the dense woods, not at us. Her scientific certainty was crumbling. "From somewhere. An echo of what?" I pressed. He didn't say it in the first place. The logic was undeniable, and it hung in the air between us, heavy and poisonous. The foundation of our shared reality was cracking. Paranoia is a defensive mechanism. When you feel you lack a protective group, you become suspicious of others to keep yourself safe from harm. We were no longer a group. We were 4 isolated people standing together, each of us now looking at the others with a flicker of doubt. "That's it. We're leaving," Chloe stated, her voice flat and final. This time, no one argued. The walk back to camp was a nightmare of hyper-vigilance. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through me. The forest no longer felt neutral. It felt malevolent, actively hostile. The silence was gone, replaced by 1,000 imagined sounds. We began breaking down camp with frantic, clumsy movements. Tents were unceremoniously stuffed into sacks, sleeping bags rolled with trembling hands. The easy, practiced efficiency of our setup was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked haste. We just wanted to be gone. Liam was working on the water filter, his back to the woods, when the next voice came. It's a form of pareidolia, but for sound. You're just filling in the blanks. It was Sarah's voice. A perfect, clinical imitation, laced with a faint, chilling mockery. It came from the trees, just beyond the edge of our clearing. but Sarah was standing right next to me, her face draining of all color, her mouth falling open in silent horror. This was different. This wasn't a shout. This wasn't a whisper. This was intelligent. It had listened to our conversation that morning. It had remembered. And now, it was throwing our own logic, our own skepticism, back in our faces. It was a direct psychological attack designed to unravel us completely. "Oh my God," Liam breathed, spinning around. The last vestiges of his skepticism were gone, replaced by raw, naked fear. The thing in the woods wasn't just a mimic. It was a predator that understood psychology. It was using our own voices, our own memories, as a weapon. This creature, whatever it was akin to the monsters from the darkest corners of folklore. The Wendigo, the Skinwalker, the Ta-Ta-Ko-Ah, beings that use mimicry not just to hunt, but to terrorize, to lure their victims with the familiar sounds of trust and love. Suddenly, a new sound started. It was a soft, whimpering cry, like a lost puppy or a small child, coming from deep within the woods, away from the river and the path back to the truck. It was a sound engineered to pluck at the most basic human instincts of pity and protection. "Don't," Chloe whispered, grabbing Liam's arm as he took an involuntary step towards the sound. "Liam, don't. It's a trap." He froze, his face a mask of conflict. He knew she was right, but the sound was so pathetic, so helpless. The crying continued, a heartbreaking little sob that seemed to echo through the dead trees. Then it stopped. The silence rushed back in, more profound than ever, and from the exact same spot, a new voice screamed, tearing the air apart. It was a voice we all knew. It was Chloe's voice, raw with agony and terror. "Help me! Alex, it's got me! Help!" I spun around, my heart stopping in my chest. But Chloe was standing right beside me, her hands clamped over her own mouth, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it seemed to swallow all other emotion. She shook her head frantically, silent tears streaming down her face. We were frozen, trapped between the sight of our friend, safe beside us, and the sound of her voice, screaming for rescue from the depths of the woods. Time shattered. For a long, silent moment, we were statues in a tableau of terror, caught between two impossible realities. There was Chloe, standing beside me, her face a canvas of pure horror, hands clamped over her mouth to stifle a sob. And then there was the other Chloe, her voice echoing from the oppressive darkness of the trees, a perfect, gut-wrenching scream of agony that was still ringing in our ears. The sound was real. The person was real. Both could not exist. My mind buckled under the strain, trying to reconcile the evidence of my eyes with the testimony of my ears. It was a violation of natural law, a cognitive dissonance so profound it felt like a physical blow. The scream had been a scalpel, expertly slicing through the last threads of our composure. The thing in the woods was no longer just mimicking us. It was performing us. It was using the voice of our friend, our sister, to broadcast her imagined death, forcing us to be the audience to a snuff play where the victim was standing right next to us. This was a level of psychological cruelty so refined, so intimate, it could only be born of a deep, ancient malice. It was Liam who broke the spell. The color had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, terrified pallor. The confident leader was gone, replaced by a man staring into an abyss that had just stared back. He didn't shout, he didn't command, he hissed a single, desperate word that cut through our paralysis. Run. There was no discussion, no plan. The carefully constructed rules of wilderness survival: stay calm, don't panic, assess the situation. Evaporated in a cloud of pure, primal fear, we abandoned everything. The tents, the sleeping bags, the stove, the water filter. thousands of dollars of gear left to be swallowed by the forest. None of it mattered. Possessions are for the living, and in that moment, our continued existence felt terrifyingly uncertain. We grabbed our small day packs, which thankfully still held our water bottles and a few protein bars, and plunged into the woods, away from the river, back towards the logging road and the truck. Our flight was a clumsy, crashing stampede through the undergrowth. Branches whipped at our faces, roots snagged our ankles, and the damp earth tried to suck the boots from our feet. We were no longer hikers, we were prey, and the predator was enjoying the hunt. The silence was over. The forest came alive with a symphony of torment conducted by a single, unseen entity. It began to play with us, using its horrific talent not just to mimic, but to create, to edit, to remix the soundtrack of our lives into a weapon. Sarah, are you scared? It was Liam's voice, calm and conversational, seeming to come from just a few feet to my right. But Liam was 10 yards ahead of me, crashing through a thicket of ferns, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I saw Sarah flinch, her head snapping around, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. Then, a perfect imitation of her own voice replied, laced with a trembling vulnerability she would never show. Yes, I've never been so scared. It was a conversation that wasn't happening. A phantom dialogue designed to make us question our own senses, to turn the space between us into a minefield of auditory illusions. It was gaslighting on a supernatural scale. The trust we had in our shared experience was being systematically dismantled. We couldn't even trust the space we occupied. The attacks grew more personal, more insidious. It began to whisper things, secrets and insecurities plucked from the deepest parts of our minds. You never should have come, Chloe. It whispered, using my voice this time. The sound was so close to my ear, I actually swatted at the air. You're the weak one. You'll be the first to die. I saw Chloe stumble, a choked sob escaping her lips. Liam grabbed her arm, pulling her along, his face a grim mask. He knew I hadn't said it, but the poison had been administered. The entity was isolating us from each other, turning us into islands of terror, each tormented by a voice that sounded like a friend, but spoke with the tongue of a demon. It was a tactic of psychological warfare. Break the unit, and the individuals will fall. It started using sounds. The distinct, metallic click of Liam's favorite lighter. The sound of Sarah's camera shutter. A sound we hadn't heard since the first afternoon. It was weaving a tapestry of our time here, using the mundane, familiar sounds of our presence to heighten the terror. It was showing us that it had been watching, listening, learning from the very beginning. The 2-hour hike from the truck to the campsite had been on a relatively clear path. Now, in our panicked retreat, the forest seemed to have conspired against us. The trail we had followed felt gone, erased. Every direction looked the same, an impenetrable wall of ancient trees and deep, menacing shadows. The landscape itself felt hostile, actively working to keep us there. The compass, Sarah gasped, fumbling in her pack. She pulled it out, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold it steady. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. It's the magnetic deposits in the rock, she stammered, trying to force science onto a situation that had long since abandoned it. It's interference. But as she said it, a new voice joined the cacophony. It was a voice we didn't recognize, a dry, rasping chuckle that sounded ancient and brittle, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. The laugh seemed to mock her explanation, to mock all our attempts to fit this horror into a neat, rational box. This was a place where the rules of physics were secondary to the rules of the nightmare. We were utterly lost. Every tree looked like every other tree. The ghost forest of dead cedars, which should have been behind us, now seemed to be visible through the trees to our left, then to our right. It was as if the landscape was shifting around us, folding in on itself, trapping us in a geographic paradox. It was then that the crying started again. Not the infant from before, but a woman's weeping, a desperate, heartbroken sound that rose and fell in the still air. "Stop!" Sarah suddenly screamed, planting her feet. She was shaking from head to toe, her face streaked with tears and dirt.
Stop it! What do you want from us?
"Sarah, no, don't talk to it!" Liam yelled, turning back for her. But it was too late. The weeping stopped instantly, and then, in a perfect, chilling imitation of Sarah's own academic tone, the voice spoke from the trees directly in front of her. The subject displays signs of extreme psychological distress. Prognosis terminal. The breakdown of group cohesion is followed by physiological collapse. It's a fascinating process, isn't it, Doctor? That broke her. A strangled cry escaped her throat, and she crumpled to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. The rational mind, her greatest defense, had been turned into a weapon and used to execute her spirit. I hauled her to her feet while Liam grabbed her other arm. We half dragged, half carried her, pushing forward with the last of our strength. The voices were all around us now, a chorus of our own terror. My voice, begging for my mother. Liam's voice, calling for his father. Chloe's voice, humming a lullaby from our childhood. Sarah's voice, reciting the Linnean classification for Douglas firs, over and over like a broken record. It was the sound of four minds coming apart at the seams. And then, through the trees, I saw it. A break in the canopy. A line that wasn't natural. The logging road. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. "There!" I yelled, my voice raw. "It's the road." We burst from the tree line, stumbling and falling onto the hard, packed gravel. We were covered in mud, bleeding from a dozen scratches, but we were out of the trees. We scrambled to our feet and looked down the road. There it was. Liam's truck, a beautiful solid. Man-made machine promising escape. We ran, a frantic, stumbling sprint towards salvation. The sounds from the forest intensified behind us, a final, desperate crescendo of screams and whispers and laughter, as if it were furious that its prey was about to escape. We reached the truck, gasping for air, leaning against the cold metal doors. We were safe, but we weren't. Liam was the first to see it. He let out a low, guttural moan of despair. I followed his gaze. All four tires were flat, slashed open with what must have been incredible force. The windows were shattered, spiderwebs of broken glass glittering in the gloom. Our escape was gone. We were stranded. My eyes drifted to the windshield, covered in a film of dust and grime. And there, scrawled across the glass, in a perfect imitation of Liam's own handwriting, was a single word. "Stee." The forest behind us fell utterly silent. The show was over. The trap was sprung. It didn't need to chase us anymore. It had us. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound yet. After the crescendo of our own voices thrown back at us, after the final, damning words scrawled on the windshield, the world went utterly still. The forest, which had been a living, breathing tormentor, now held its breath. It was the silence of a predator that has cornered its prey and knows there is no escape. It was watching us, savoring our despair. We stood by the ruined truck, four people hollowed out by fear. The word "stay" in Liam's perfect script was not a request. It was a statement of fact. We were its property now. The bonds of friendship and trust, which had felt so unbreakable just 24 hours ago, had been systematically corroded, eaten away, by the acid of suspicion and terror. We looked at each other, but we didn't see friends. We saw potential threats, strangers wearing familiar faces. The paranoia was no longer a defensive mechanism, it was our new reality. Liam stared at the slashed tires, his hands clenched into white, knuckled fists. The leader in him was dead. He, the man of plans and preparedness, had led us into a trap from which there was no logical escape. His confidence had been the group's spine, and now it was shattered. He looked at his own handwriting on the glass, and a shudder racked his body. It was a violation of his very identity. Sarah was a ghost. She sat on the damp gravel of the road, hugging her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth in a slow, rhythmic motion. Her eyes were vacant, staring at nothing. The entity had taken her greatest weapon, her intellect, and turned it against her, showing her a world that defied every law she held sacred. It had proven her reality wrong, and her mind had simply shut down in the face of that terrible truth. Chloe was the only one who seemed to retain a sliver of fight, but it was the cornered, desperate fight of an animal. Her intuition had been right all along, but it was no comfort now. She stood with her back pressed against the truck's door, her gaze darting into the tree line, flinching at shadows that weren't there. And me, I felt like a camera, a recording device capturing the final, terrible moments. My mind was a maelstrom of fear, but a detached part of me was simply observing, documenting the collapse. It was this detachment, I think, that kept me from breaking entirely. The creeping realization that the horror wasn't just in the woods, but in our own minds, was settling in like a terminal disease. Night was falling again, the gray light thickening into an inky, impenetrable black. We couldn't stay on the road. It was too exposed. But the thought of entering the woods was a physical sickness. Fire. Liam finally croaked, his voice rough and unfamiliar. We need a fire. It was a primal instinct, the last resort of a species that has feared the dark for millennia. Fire was a weapon, a defense. In the lore of the Wendigo, it was the only thing that could truly kill the beast. It was a sliver of hope, a plan born from the ashes of all other plans. We worked in a daze, gathering wood from the edge of the forest, never venturing more than a few feet into the oppressive darkness. We didn't speak. The silence was a chasm between us. Every snap of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot. We built the fire in the middle of the logging road, a pitiful circle of light in an ocean of black. As the flames grew, casting our distorted shadows against the wall of trees, a strange thing happened. The voices started again, but they were different now. They were quieter, subtler. From the woods, I heard my own voice, humming a tune I hadn't thought of in years, a song my grandmother used to sing to me. It wasn't loud or menacing. It was gentle, nostalgic, and infinitely more terrifying for it. It was a sound from the deepest, most protected part of my memory, now co-opted by the monster. It was telling me it knew everything about me. Then, a soft weeping started. It was Sarah's voice, but not the panicked sobs from before. This was a sound of profound, quiet grief. I looked at Sarah, still rocking on the ground, and saw that her face was dry. She wasn't crying. The thing was performing her internal state for us, broadcasting her brokenness. This was its final, most cruel game. It was no longer just mimicking us. It was becoming us. It was blurring the line between the outside and the inside, until we couldn't tell where the forest ended and our own minds began. It's in my head, Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with a new, more profound horror. I can hear it, thinking. That's when my own thoughts began to feel alien. A voice, identical to my own internal monologue. Whispered in my mind, Liam is weak. He's going to get us all killed. You have to leave him. I recoiled, my blood running cold. Was that my thought? Or was it the entity planting it there? I looked at Liam, who was staring into the fire, his face a mask of anguish, and I felt a flash of suspicion, of resentment. The poison was working. We sat there for hours, prisoners in our circle of light, while the thing in the woods conducted a symphony of our own psyches. It didn't need to scream anymore. It just whispered, using our own fears and doubts as its instruments. It replayed arguments we'd had, whispered insecurities we'd never spoken aloud. It was turning us against each other with surgical precision. The group, our shield against the dark, was now the source of the threat. The end came not with a roar, but with a gentle, loving call. Alex, honey, it's time to come home. It was my mother's voice. A perfect, flawless imitation full of warmth and love. She had died 5 years ago. I knew it wasn't real. My logical mind screamed that it was a trick, the most obvious trap yet. But my heart, starved for comfort, for safety, betrayed me. For a split second, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to walk towards that voice, to leave the fire and the fear behind. I saw Liam's head snap up, his eyes looking past me into the darkness. Dad, he whispered, a look of childlike hope on his face. At the same time, Chloe let out a soft gasp. Mom! It was calling to all of us at once, using the voices of our most beloved dead. It was offering us an escape, a release from the terror, a promise of reunion. It was a lie, but it was a beautiful one, and Sarah fell for it. She stood up, her movements stiff and robotic. I'm coming, she said, her voice flat, and she began to walk away from the fire, towards the tree line. Sarah, no! I screamed, scrambling to my feet. Liam and I grabbed her, pulling her back, but she fought with a strength I didn't know she possessed.
Let me go!
She shrieked, her eyes wild.
He's waiting for me!
He's going to explain everything. And then she was gone. One moment she was struggling in our grasp, the next she was simply not. She didn't run. She vanished into the darkness as if it had swallowed her whole. We heard no scream, no struggle, just silence. The fire was dying. The circle of light was shrinking. Liam, Chloe, and I were huddled together, no longer out of friendship, but out of sheer animal terror. We were the last ones left. We have to run, Liam said, his voice broken. Follow the road. Don't look back, don't listen. Just run. And we did. We abandoned the dying fire and ran into the suffocating darkness of the road. Behind us, the voices swelled. Our own voices, laughing, crying, screaming our names. The voice of the thing itself, that dry, ancient chuckle, echoing all around us. I don't know what happened to Liam and Chloe. I remember running beside them, their ragged breaths mingling with my own. I remember Chloe tripping and Liam stopping to help her up. I remember looking back for a split second, and in the gloom, I saw them standing there, looking not at me, but at something in the woods, their faces illuminated by a soft, pale light. They weren't scared anymore. They looked peaceful. I didn't stop. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I ran until the sun came up, and the terrible silence of the forest was replaced by the familiar sounds of birds. I stumbled along that logging road for what felt like days, until a pair of hunters found me, dehydrated and incoherent, miles from where our truck was. They told the police I was suffering from exposure and shock. They found the truck, the slashed tires, the shattered windows. They found our campsite abandoned. They never found Sarah or Liam or Chloe. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, not a body. It was as if the forest had simply erased them. I am writing this now because I have to. I have to believe that what happened was real, that I'm not insane. But the line is so blurry now. The horror didn't stay in those woods. It followed me home. It lives in the quiet moments, in the space between sounds. I hear whispers in the static of the radio. I hear familiar voices call my name from empty rooms. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, my own thoughts don't feel like my own. Something in the Willapa Hills learned our voices. It learned our fears. And it learned how to get inside. I escaped the forest, but I don't think I'll ever truly get away. The echo is always there, waiting in the silence, reminding me that the most terrifying monster is the one that sounds just like you.